a continuing society. It would destroy a society. First of all, the government doesn't have any responsibility. People have responsibility. This building doesn't have responsibility. You and I have responsibility. People have responsibility. Second, the question is, how can we as people exercise our responsibility toward our fellow man most effectively?
Milton Friedman, well, the man. So the question here, I believe, was posed to him as to what is the responsibility of the government to help the poor. That was a follow up into this Q&A. By the way, John Soto, thanks for coming out here. Subscribe if you can. It really helps me out a lot. So he is essentially saying that the premise or the question that was posed to him was essentially putting the government as the having the responsibility to care for the downtrodden, the poor, whatever. And his point is the government is nothing. The government is no one. The government is not a being, right? The people that are part of the government. So it's essentially it's people. It's people that need to help other people. And he'll break it down a little bit further. That's the problem. So far as poverty is concerned, there has never in history been a more effective machine for eliminating poverty than the free enterprise system and the free market. The period in... He'll always get that applause, by the way, because even to this day, it is true. Free market, free enterprise, capitalism is the dominant way to get the poor out of poverty. Right? I see it all the time. Our family is from an island from the Dominican Republic, and we go there quite frequently. And in the DR, there are a lot of issues. Don't get me wrong, but have an idea and you have a product. You can set up a stand wherever you want, and you can start making money. You just do it. You don't need a permit. You don't need anything. You just if you have a bunch of fruit or you have plantain trees in your backyard and you want to sell them, you cut them down. You get yourself a little cart. You push it around and you sell and you make money. And then you can progress from there. And I've known people that have progressed from there, from literal stands to markets and so on. So you can't that can't come from the top down government. It can't come from government that is trying to structure society, trying to structure the market system, trying to set pricing systems like they do in communist countries where, they are told what they can and cannot make and how much they can and cannot sell it for. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work. That's where you have shortages and it's an absolute mess. If anyone's ever really done a deep dive into what supermarkets looked like in the Soviet Union, or in any other of those countries. I can't remember exactly who it was. I don't know if it was Gorbachev. I'm going to screw this one up, but whatever. I'll just let it run. It was essentially, it was somebody from Russia that I think came over to the United States. I believe it was during the Reagan administration. And so this is not a long time ago. And he was in Florida, I believe, and he passed by and went into a supermarket. If you guys know the exact person that is, drop it down in the comments. And he almost cried. He could not believe what he saw. And this was, to him, I think that there were some reports that said it, if they had taken Americans to a supermarket in the USSR at the time, obviously they would have staged it. And he just couldn't believe that he goes into a random market. It wasn't a planned thing. He just says, let's see what American supermarkets look like. And, they just walked into a random supermarket. And he just said the bounty that was before him. He said, had his people seen that, they would have instantly had a revolution. Instantly. Just because of the bounty of food in a random supermarket. And that's something that the USSR and any communist nation cannot compete with. Because you just have to, once you step back and you think about the vast, it's amazing when you think about it. When you go through everything in the market, when you walk down a supermarket, you think about every one of those products is done in a factory, was the brainchild of somebody that, it's actually insane. It really is insane when you think about how these markets work and how they function. And that was something that, and this was somebody that was very high in the in government in the USSR. I'm upset that I'm blanking on his name, but when he saw this, he was, you can look it up on YouTube. You could just type in Russian or USSR guy goes into Florida supermarket, and it's a pretty amazing clip, and it kind of just illustrates how powerful capitalism can be, especially if you just let it rip, right? And you're not, now we have lobbyists and we have special interests and we have, people they're putting their hands on the scale, and that's when it becomes an issue, right? Because it's not capitalism, it's not free market, right? It's crony capitalism. These massive companies that have depressed what the free market should really be doing.
The period in which you had the greatest improvement in the lot of the ordinary man was the period of the 19th and early 20th century. Those of us in this room are the heirs of that. We benefited from the way in which our parents and our grandparents were able to come here. And by virtue of the freedom that was offered to them, were able to make a better life for themselves and them and us. But next, if you look at the real problems of poverty and denial of freedom to people in this country, almost every single one of them is a result of government action and would be eliminated if you eliminated the bad government failures. Let me be precise and specific. Why do we have so high an unemployment rate among black teenagers? It's a disgrace and a scandal. Why do we have so high an unemployment rate? First of all, because we give them lousy schooling through governmental schools, which make them unqualified to hold decent jobs.
Oh, this is where he starts hitting you really hard. If this is your first time consuming Milton, it is a wild thing how your brain will start to open up. I remember hearing this for the first time. I remember hearing his argument that there should not be any public schooling, period. And as a product of New York City, where it's essentially all public schooling, and a few kids here and there. I mean, I did go to Catholic school. My parents did send me to Catholic school for the first 8 years. I was very lucky. But for the most part, I didn't know anyone else that went to, except for my classmates. But the notion that there should be no public schools was the most bonkers thing I've ever heard of when I first heard it coming out of his mouth. And I didn't understand it. It didn't make sense to me. And it agitated me. It agitated me because I didn't understand it. And it didn't make sense. And if ever you've been struck with a new idea, at first you're very, very defensive, right? Because if someone presents to you something that they believe in, and you can see that he believes in, right? You can see that he has thought this through. This is not something that he's just spewing out. These are ideas that have been carefully thought through. And you can see that. And if someone presents to you something like that, and it's totally contrary to what you think, and again, I say think because this is not something that you necessarily have thought about prior, right? Like if you, your entire life, grew up in a city and you saw public schools everywhere, why would you ever even consider the fact, well, why do we have these things? Maybe they should all be private. You would never consider it. It wouldn't enter your mind. So it's just something that is just truth. It is just truth. It is the truth that you have in your mind because you've never even considered an alternative because you haven't had to because it's not, you're a kid or even you're an adult. It's just nothing you ever thought about. And then he presents an argument that just shatters you. It shatters your world. It shatters your views of everything. And I do have to say that this idea of no public schooling, and again, he doesn't go into detail in this here. He does a whole lecture on this, excellent lecture. But it changes your world. This thing, I honestly think this was probably my red pill moment, to be honest with you, all those years ago. Because it was just something that was so, it just blew my mind. And it makes so much sense once you hear him out and you go through you go through the steps. I'm not going to break it down here, but you can find his lecture on it. But this was one of the most defining moments for me, and it can be something that small to you. It could be something that small. It could just be somebody that's challenging your status quo, your methodology, your something that is just so true to you. They just throw a pebble and it just cracks. Everything cracks. And then you open up and you start to say, well, if that's horseshit, or if that is, not true, then what else is? And you just start tumbling down. Yeah, but it's a pretty special thing.
And second of all, we require employers to discriminate against them by not hiring them unless their productivity is enough to justify a minimum wage.
Again, he glosses over that too. He's ripping on this answer. He's absolutely ripping on this answer. This answer, if you want to put Milton Friedman in a, give someone like the problem is that if you just listening to this out of the box and out of context, you're going to be taken aback, and because he's just jamming right now, and he's not going in depth and breaking everything down. He's just giving this guy an answer. It's a very good answer, but it's an answer that requires a massive amount of explanation. And if this is your first take on him, you're going to say, no, that's got to be bullshit. That has to be, if you've never heard the fact that, especially like what I believe, my belief now is that there should be no minimum wage, period. And many people would dispute that and argue it, and you can go back and forth. And there's a lot of reasons why there shouldn't be a minimum wage, right? The most being, why is the government involved in a contract between two consenting adults? And usually the counter argument to that is, well, then the employer is going to take advantage of the employee. Well, how can you take advantage of somebody that's willing to do something for a certain amount? Whatever. I'm not going to litigate this and get into the nitty gritty right here. But again, this is another lob, right? This is another thing where it's like, in my young mind, higher minimum wage would be good for everybody. It's a higher minimum wage. Why wouldn't that be good for everybody? And then he breaks you down and he explains to you why. It all makes sense and it all falls into place.
The minimum wage rate is the most anti-Negro law in the books. And it's an anti-Negro law because it precisely, having first not enabled the young blacks to have a decent schooling so that they can have productivity, we next deny them the on-the-job training that they might get if you could induce employers by being able to hire them for relatively low wages to give them on-the-job training that would make them qualify for higher payment and higher productivity. In the third place, we have constructed a governmental welfare scheme which has been a machine for producing poor people. We have induced people to come under control of welfare. I'm not blaming the people, don't misunderstand me. It's our fault for constructing so perverse and so ill-shaped a monster as a whole set of welfare programs we have under which we encourage people, families to break up. We encourage people to move from one part of the country and come to another, under which we have, in effect, made many people poor. And yet, when all this is said and done, have I ever been where?
Welfare or poor.
I have, sir. Of course, more so than most of the people in this room.
So, have you ever been poor? More so than most people in this room. He's going to give his one-liner here that it kills. I think this was the only time he did this, but this was pretty badass. Listen to his comeback here.
How many of you have worked a 12-hour day and gotten paid 78 cents?
Not that.
But let me go back to but you know that's all irrelevant. Is there one of you who is going to say that you don't want a doctor to treat you for cancer unless he himself has had cancer?
So that's Milton. So, if you want to say he's like, obviously like Shapiro and other people that have come after him, they're very intellectual guys. They're very smart guys. Not saying that I agree with them or disagree with them or whatever. I'm just bringing him up as an example that they're the ones that took this idea of they're super intellectuals. They're super smart. They have the facts on their side. They have the numbers and stats and ideas on their side, not just feeling. And they kill it, man. Milton absolutely kills it. I think he ends it here. Let's see.
I could go down the line. But when all is said and done, while there are people in this country who are worse off than other people, by and large, even the poorest people in this country are relatively well off compared to the conditions in many other countries in the world. What we take as our standard of poverty, is above the average income of all of the people in the Soviet Union, let alone of the people in India or China or in other countries. Now, that doesn't mean we should be satisfied with it. We are a wealthier country and we've been more productive, and we should set higher standards by ourselves. But by the same token, we ought to have a sense of proportion, and we ought to recognize both the source and the problem equal.
I mean, just what a mind, man. And again, it's not. He's not talking about economic theory. He's not getting into minutia of economics, micro or macro or whatever. You know, I think he's wearing his Adam Smith tie there, which he always would wear. I think it was the Wealth of Nations, or I can't remember what book Adam Smith wrote. This was one of the original, free market economists back in the 18 whatever. But just an absolute monster. And it's because he was able to get his point across of relatively complex issues, right? But he would hit you with the idea right square in your forehead. You can feel it when he talks. He blindsides you with ideas that are completely out of your frame of reference. They're ideas that just pass through either side of you. This is the kind of way I think about it. When you talk about minimum wage, schooling, trade, all of these things, right? These are things that are just your daily lives. You're not seeing them. You're not focused on them. They mean absolutely nothing to you, but you have some sort of an opinion on them because of the way that you have either consumed media or your education background, whatever it is. And he takes these things and he puts them into the forefront. He puts them right in front of you. And he says, this is what you believe? Well, it's wrong. This is why. And he was fantastic. Fantastic. Guys, thanks a lot for joining me on another Friedman saga. If you can, please hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out a lot. If you want to follow me on X, 6283 Talk on the X, I'm John Soto. We'll see you in the next one. Thank you.